Good afternoon, everyone. I want to just take a few minutes of your time today to welcome you here to the School of Social Service Administration. My name is Deborah Gorman-Smith. I'm the Dean of the School of Social Service Administration, which would not exist if not for Sophonisba, and to share some of what is the legacy of your family. So we refer to Grace Edith Abbott and Sophonisba as the founding mothers of SSA. Some of you may have already heard that Sophonisba and Edith were lifelong partners. You know that there are so many firsts about Sophonisba. She was the first woman to graduate from the law school. She was the first woman to get her PhD in political science here at the University of Chicago. She was the first woman to be admitted to the bar.
I applaud my Aunt Madeline for setting up this wonderful day. And I have to say that I was very surprised that the university seemed to embrace us so enthusiastically, because I had no idea that Sophonisba was such a star and had been truly groundbreaking in her life and in her successes, and that the wonderful people in the university today, I thought who were so gracious, kind, and lovely, treated us as though we had given them a gift of our time to come. And I thought that was tremendously touching.
She was by far the most accomplished person in her class. This was fairly standard for women who achieved higher education goals at the time. They had to be 10 times better than men to get where they were going, so the ones who succeeded tend to be exceedingly accomplished.
Just the way they are now.
Exactly. Yes.
Today's experience was educationally amazing. I thought the staff and the people who took us around the University of Chicago did an extraordinary job of explaining who Sophonisba was, what she meant to the University of Chicago as well as to the field of social work, and really made her come alive as such an important role model.
They're able to say that. Most of our peer law schools did not admit women until the 20s or 30s, some of them as late as the 1950s and 60s. We have admitted women from the beginning. That is in part due to Ms. Breckinridge. We have her autobiography, which you'll hear more about later, her notes from our archivist over at Special Collections. And she already had a PhD from the university by the time she came here. She wrote in her autobiography, "It's my understanding that the university intends to start a law school. I better attend just to make sure." She got a law degree just to keep us honest. Do you wonder why I love her so much?
I was overwhelmed with how intelligent this woman was, how she could have done all these things. And I mean, I photographed her diplomas. I mean, my goodness, she had 4 or 5 diplomas. I just think that she was a very strong, determined person. But reading her letters, it sounded like she was also a loving person. So, and what she did with the world, obviously she was a loving person. So she was strong, but loving and firm.
I'm a school social worker in Chicago Public Schools. And there were documents that we reviewed that talked about, during her time, truancy issues in the Chicago public school system. I mean, she was connected not only to the public schools, she was connected to the juvenile court system. She was connected to, working on child labor laws and compulsory education. She was concerned about the state of poverty of families living in Chicago at that time and developing programs to help families and young children. So it's her work that laid the foundation for everything that I do today. So she's a very important person.
What was really critical about what they did about social work, and what is at the core of our mission here at SSA, is that what we do should be guided by research and rigorous inquiry, that social work is not just doing good, because we know that often the things that we think are helpful turns out may not actually be helpful, and that should be guided by research and evaluation. And Sofonisba really pushed that. She started the first research journal in social work, the Social Service Review, which is still housed here at SSA, and she started that.
Well, at first, when we walked in, we didn't really know what NSBA's connection was to the university.
Tell you how excited I am to be meeting Deborah Breckinridge's descendants. This makes me incredibly happy. Can I just get you all to tell me how you're all exactly related to her?
So we were really coming in kind of blind, and we walked in, and Marcia, who was our tour guide, said, this is the family of NSBA Breckinridge. And we all thought, wow, what does that mean? So that was pretty special. And I was so impressed with the material that we were given by the archivist. I mean, the books she had written, her personal correspondence, the photographs, the diplomas were amazing. And I guess she was writing her autobiography. And just for me, trying to piece together the members of the family, because, that was it was so interesting to be able to see that.
This is one of my favorite quotes. So, on choosing a life as an activist instead of life as a woman of Kentucky elite society, Sofonisba said, I would rather have a good fight any afternoon, even if I get beaten, than to go to a party anytime.
And I've learned that she was an economist, a political scientist, a researcher, a radical political person who was with a small group that brought the NAACP to life in Chicago. First people to bring the Chicago chapter of the NAACP to life. She worked at Hull House, I knew, and with Jane Addams. And Chicago gave her an opportunity that women of her day did not have. The University of Chicago gave her that same opportunity. But I would say there are certain things she was that really follow in a very powerful way, principles and attitudes and personalities that the Breckinridges have had as far back as I've ever heard any story told. She was going to live her life the way she wanted to, not the way somebody else told her to. She was highly intelligent, but the family has been dedicated to service always. Political service, she took it to a new level. Hers was the first generation where the women of the family stepped out and did something really radical for their time and their gender. And we're a family that has a habit of looking back and taking our inspiration and our sense of ourselves in a way that includes the context of what the people before us did. My father used to joke, the Breckinridges say they're Presbyterians, but really they're ancestor worshipers. So with Sofonisba, that's an exciting prospect. She would be cutting edge today with what she was saying in the 1890s and the early part of the last century.
My mother went to reunions. I never went to any kind of reunion, but I've always been curious about the Breckinridge family, partly because there's so many stories and there's so much lore and history, and I felt very connected to the past and to a family that I had never met, I never really knew. So I think I always felt a kinship to the Breckinridge tradition, as being a family that had a tradition and was proud of it, with all of its ups and downs and good and bad and very raunchy stories and very full of life. And with that comes an acceptance of people as they are, politically correct or incorrect, most of the time incorrect, loving each other as extended family members. The Breckinridges laud their political contributions to public service, which is amazing. But this is an academic and a socially based, culturally forward-thinking person whose intellect was above and beyond anything I had ever understood. Today's experience was educationally amazing. I really didn't know anything. Read a little bit online, but I thought the staff and the people who took us around the University of Chicago did an extraordinary job of explaining to us who Sophie Nisbet was, what she meant to the University of Chicago, as well as to the field of social work and law, and breaking barriers. And we did not know how important Nisbet was to the city, to the University of Chicago. And the individuals we met today really made her come alive as such an important role model and a founder of traditions that have continued to this day. There have been 2 or 3 other women in the family who followed her, who have also been tremendous pioneers in their own experience, their own field of work, photography, nursing, frontier nursing I mentioned. And I think to have a role model in your family who says it can be done, whatever it is, but you can think and behave and stretch beyond your current experience, that it is allowed to do this, and it gives you a freedom to try. You have to have a vision of something beyond what your family, your friends are telling you, to stretch beyond your own self-talk at the moment. So having a family members who have braved to do things non-traditionally, I think gives others the open door. Give it a try. It may or may not work, but it's important to try. She is a definite role model. We all said she probably was a very difficult person from the family point of view, from her tremendous intellect and opinion, and the causes that she was involved with are hard to deal with when you're more conventional, because she was pushing all of the boundaries. And we were chatting why none of us really knew much about her, and I'm sure her life, her work was a problem and a threat to many people's conventional lives and wisdom. Family was really important. No one disowned her, no one disavowed her, but I think it really challenged people to examine their own belief system, and that's a time of social unrest, just the way our generation had in the 60s, and it is very hard when your world is being pushed, especially by a family member. But I think she was probably supported because she was a Breckinridge, and no matter what, the Breckinridges stick together.